This is Carolina Haints. Carolina Haints presents Folk, a show about our stories. I'm your host, Dan Sellers. On Carolina Haints, we've talked a great deal about murder ballads. The Carolinas have spawned some of the best ballads in music history, from poor Ellen Smith to old Tom Dooley. You know, as a culture, we've always loved true crime. Nowadays, the true crime genre is huge in bookstores and the podcast field. Back in the early 20th century, murder ballads were a way of popularizing and retelling the tragic stories, perhaps in a more accessible way. And of course, behind every murder ballad, no matter how fictionalized they may be, is a real-life tale just waiting to be told. Today we're talking about another terrible murder that inspired some of the greats such as Doc Watson and Bob Dylan to tell their story. I'm talking, of course, about Naomi Wise. The story begins in the early 19th century where Naomi, an orphan, lived with a family in what was then called New Salem, but is now known today as Randleman in northern Randolph County. As she grew into a lovely young woman, she met a handsome young man named Jonathan Lewis. But behind those dashing good looks and charm was one hell of a temper. She met Jonathan as he would walk past her family's farm on the way to work every day. They caught the eye of one another, as attractive young folks often do. And after some time, it was more than just a fleeting attraction. Folks knew that Naomi was madly in love. And once again, as so often happens with young love, especially one filled with so much passion, Naomi and Jonathan got pregnant. Naomi couldn't be happier. That was about to come to an end. You see, Jonathan didn't exactly feel the same way about her. In fact, he was seeing another young woman at the time, his boss's daughter, Hetty Elliott. With Hetty, Jonathan would have been able to really improve his standing in the world. He could go from not just working at the shop, but someday inheriting it and owning it. Jonathan knew that this future was in serious jeopardy with Naomi so publicly smitten with him, and with it only being a matter of time before everyone knew she was with child. Jonathan devised a plan. He asked Naomi to marry him in a small, secret ceremony at a romantic spot, a natural spring. It was April, and the deep river would have been beautiful. They crossed it on horseback. She was completely trusting of Jonathan, so she was horrified to realize that as they were halfway across, that his intentions were not that of marriage, but of betrayal. He told her what a fool she was for believing him, before he shoved her on the back of his horse, plunging her into the flowing waters. He held her under the water as she fought and struggled to get up. That is, until she stopped struggling. Naomi's body washed up on the riverbank the following morning, and everyone in town immediately accused Jonathan Lewis of murder. The townsfolk dragged Jonathan to the spot where Naomi was found, and they made plans right then and there to hang him. They decided to schedule his execution and jail him in the interim. Well, Jonathan Lewis had other plans. He managed to escape his captivity and headed west. Years later, he was finally recaptured and brought back for a formal trial, but by this time there was not enough evidence to convict him, and he was once again freed. Part of the legend says that many years later on his deathbed, Jonathan finally confessed to murdering Naomi Wise and suggested that her ghost had compelled him to tell the truth. The subsequent murder ballad has become one of the most quintessential folk songs ever to be sung. It's been passed down orally and in writing for generations. And it goes a little something like this.
Hop up behind me and away we will go. We'll go down to the river where the deep waters flow. There he beat her, he strangled her till she could hardly speak. He threw her in the river where the water's 20 foot deep.
In 2019, a Legends and Lore historical marker was erected in Randleman that states, Naomi Wise, drowned in Deep River by her lover in 1807, became subject of well-known North Carolina ballad bearing her name.
Young William was fishing out one sunny morn. He spied Naomi's body come up in a storm.
This episode was brought to you by Wreak Havoc Productions and Carolina Haints Incorporated, a nonprofit organization dedicated to promoting folklore storytelling throughout the Carolinas. You can find everything we're up to, including the Carolina Haints book, podcast episodes, and speaking engagements at our website, carolinahaints.com. We'll be back next week with a new episode. Tune in then to keep the tradition of oral storytelling alive.